Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you We have a lot to talk about today. The Celtics take a 3-0 series lead on the Dallas Mavericks, push them to the brink of elimination. The Celtics are one win away from their league-leading 18th title in team history. The fourth game is tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit about Game 3, everything that happened in what was a wild, crazy game that had so many lead changes and advantage changes. We'll talk about everything, the highs and lows in that game. We'll talk a little bit about Luka, his performance in particular, and what the Mavericks need to do if they want any chance of breaking the 0-56 record of teams losing after going down 3-0 in the NBA Finals. We'll also talk a little bit about the Lakers head coaching search, as it looks like JJ Redick is once again the number one option in LA. Then we'll move into the world of football. We'll talk a little bit about the punishments that were handed out to the Eagles and the Falcons in regards to their tampering stuff with the offseason and free agents, Saquon Barkley, Kirk Cousins, and others, as well as the situation developing in New Orleans with Alvin Kamara. So stick around for all of that. Before we get into our Game 3 finals recap, though, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all you would like me to talk about, you would like to know about, go ahead and throw that in the comments, in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around and talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to start off our show today with the NBA Finals Game 3. The Celtics took a 3-0 series lead last night behind a great game by Jason Tatum. It was kind of an insane game overall. You start off, and the loss of Kristaps Porzingis is something that, even though the Celtics were able to pull this game out, you could see it. You could see the difference in the way that they played the game and the way that the Mavericks were attacking them and the success that the Mavericks were able to have without Kristaps Porzingis in the lineup, being down there as a rim protector. And you also saw how it kind of threw Boston's offense out of rhythm for like stretches of that game. In the beginning of it, right off the gates, they didn't have him, and then in that at the end of the third, beginning of the fourth quarter, when they gave up that 20-2 run to let the Mavericks get back into it, you could tell the offense was off rhythm, and I think having Kristaps Porzingis there would have been a huge help for an offense that, well, they played pretty good, and we finally had a great Jason Tatum game in the playoffs, the first one of this playoffs. He was efficient, he was making his shots. It's the first time the offense was still out of rhythm, and I think not having Kristaps Porzingis after having him back for 2 games is what threw him off. But we talk about this Celtics team, and, we're wondering why they've been so dominant. The way that they build this roster from the outside in, their 3-point shooting, it's been incredible, right? Obviously, they had their struggles in Game 2, and they were able to pull that out. But in Game 3 here, 56% of their shots, 56% of the shots that they took in the game, 46 threes. That's the highest clip ever in an NBA Finals game. They took the highest percentage of three-point shots, 56%. And this is the way that the Celtics play, right? They've made 43 threes in this series. They've more than doubled the output of the threes from the Dallas Mavericks. And that's why we're kind of looking at this series like it's over. Not just because it's 3-0, not just because there were plenty of different mistakes, plenty of different opportunities for the Mavericks to go and take this lead that they squandered. I mean, you could make the argument that the Mavericks could be up 2-1 right now. You know, game 2, you can make the argument they should have taken advantage of Boston having a terrible shooting night. In game 3 last night, you can make the argument that if Luka doesn't foul out, if Luka plays a little smarter on defense, doesn't pick up those 3 fouls in 5 minutes, maybe then they win this game. They were on a roll. They had cut the lead down to 3, and eventually without Luka they weren't able to get that. And we'll talk a little bit more about Luka and the Mavericks in the next segment. But you can make the argument that the Celtics should be losing this series, and the fact that they aren't, the fact that they've been able to weather the storm given to them by the Dallas Mavericks, whether it be their fault or not. And I know them almost blowing a lead again. I mean, even in game 1, they were able to rebound from it. But in the third quarter of game 1, the Mavericks cut the lead down to 8 points. So it's not like this Mavericks team doesn't have fight. And this series kind of has been disappointing because in the first 2 games, Kyrie wasn't able to do anything. Kyrie finally has a great game, goes for 35 points, 35 points on really good efficiency. I mean, he shot just about 50% from the field, 13 of 28, 4 of 6 from 3. He was the leader on offense. Luka Doncic had a pretty poor game, and like I said, we'll talk about that. But in a game where finally we have Kyrie Irving show up, Luka Doncic disappears, and Luka fouls out, and it kills their chances. So the Mavericks have been shooting themselves in the foot in this series, and the Celtics have been letting them back into games. They get in these stretches where they get cold, where they can't hit a shot, where that's their weakness as a team that relies too much on threes. They rely so much on that three ball that, you live by the sword, you die by the sword mentality, that it backfires in their face a lot. But we're not talking about that right now because they're up 3-0 in a series against the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks, who have had a tough road, and really the Celtics, this has been them the whole time. You just wait for their downfall, and they're not going to do it. They just continue to pave their way forward, and they continue to just dominate everybody in their way. Uh, you know, Eric says, Mavs not in 6, Mavs in 7. I mean, if they're going to do it, it'd be an incredible comeback, right? And we'll talk about what the Mavericks have to do in the second segment to come back. But to your point, I mean, that would be a historic comeback. It's never been done before. Uh, it's something that you know is unprecedented, especially the way that they look. They kind of look disjointed right now, and they need to get themselves together. But not having Kristaps Porzingis there, even though the Celtics were able to win, is something that the Mavericks were exploiting, right? They were able to get inside in this game, drive inside, get those interior shots, make the Celtics crash, get those kick out shots more often. It helped Kyrie Irving. I know Luka missed a bunch down low, but again, Luka wasn't having his greatest game. Jason Tatum finally had his best game of the postseason. The big knock on him is his efficiency. He puts up 31 points on 11 of 26 shooting. Jaylen Brown, 30 points on 12 of 22. These guys, especially down the stretch, Jaylen Brown was the one that broke the Celtics out of their slump. He was the one that was able to keep them focused, keep them in the game, keep them from blowing a 20-point lead to the Dallas Mavericks. Not a look you want for a team that is supposed to be one of the best offenses and defenses in the entire league. But yeah, like I was saying, in our next segment, we are going to break down the Mavericks, talking about what Luka did, his complaints after the game, all the talk surrounding Luka Doncic, with his defense and the foul calls and his effort in this game, and we'll see what the Mavericks have to do to potentially pull out a historic comeback. down 3-0, first time ever in this series. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Body in the world. Please, Lord, give me a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. I'm sold and slow for 1,000 faces. Hey, eating my way into be put down. It ain't replaced all this my time. I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the losing fit, the losing shit. It's stupid if you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight the lose your grip and lose a gift. Feel like I'm losing my mind. Everybody in the world now. Please don't give me a sign. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just broke down the Celtics half of that successful Game 3 for them. Everything that they did to go up 3-0, basically putting that series away, as it has never happened, comeback from down 3-0 before. On the other side, the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic in specific, we're going to talk a little bit about that here in this segment. And then we're going to finish up our NBA coverage with the Lakers head coaching search and a little bit of the Cavaliers in there as well. But before we get into all of that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the chat. Go ahead and throw that in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, tuning in, and talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. Once again, that link to leave a tip or donation is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, in this segment here, we're going to take a look at the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic more in specific. And the question I have is, can the Mavs come back, right? And that might seem like a nice, quick, simple no. But when you're looking into this series, right, at the beginning of it, everyone thought this was going to be a fun series. I thought this was going to be a good competitive series. And the Celtics have kind of come out and dismantle all of that. Now, I know the Mavericks kind of have had a nightmare series for them, right? Luka fouls out in a tough situation, one where, you kind of expect them to start to lean on him. He is hurt a little bit. He has that knee issue. He's been getting painkiller shots before game 2 and game 3 to go ahead and play in. He's not 100%, and he is such a big offensive weapon, that he has to be out there. You saw how sluggish and inefficient the offense was once he left. 4 minutes left, they couldn't really put up much of a fight, and Kyrie was having himself a huge game, but it's not quite enough. If Kyrie could have played like this in game 2, they win that. And like I was saying, you could make the argument that the Mavs should have won this game, that they could, and maybe even should be up 2-0 right now. But the Boston Celtics are able to fight them off even after they go into this huge slump for the second time in 3 games, and they're able to fight off the Mavericks comeback, right? I don't want to write off the Mavericks, though, because Luka Doncic is such a special offensive player. And there's a lot of discussions today about his defense and his defensive effort, and it kind of gets put in the spotlight because he did foul out in a high leverage situation, game 3 of the NBA Finals, on not just a foul that he had to make, but really what you might call a frustration foul. He he gets beat a little bit in transition, and he tries to draw a charge. It's not a smart play, right? And Luka knows that. I'm sure he does. But he puts himself in this situation where he is in the position to foul out. His fouls are, a lot of them are frustration fouls, especially in this game. He turns the ball over and then he goes all aggressive on defense and slaps the arm of the Celtics players. There's examples of this where, well, we all know that Luka isn't the greatest defender, right? This isn't earth-shattering news. Luka Doncic is not a great NBA defender, and usually they're able to hide him, right? They're able to throw him against, someone that isn't going to be able to be like the Celtics. All of them on the Celtics shoot from the outside, dribble inside, be quick, athletic, and handle the ball. Usually there's a guy for Luka to go up and match up against, but against this Celtics team, you can't just put him up against a big guy. It's not going to work out, right? They all can shoot from three, stretch the floor, and if they're able to get by him, which he's not the quickest on his feet, he doesn't have the best conditioning, which was really showing up in this series. That's one of my bigger takeaways. Uh, it's 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 uh it's harder for the rest of the Mavericks to come and play help defense because they're spread so much on the outside, and spacing is such a huge part of it. We talked about how the Boston Celtics put up the highest percentage of threes for one team in NBA Finals history in Game 3. 56% of their shots from the field were three-pointers. That is a new record. That's insane. And they're hitting it at 37%, 34% on the series. Even with that horrendous shooting night in game 2, they're still shooting a respectable number here. It's something that's so impressive with this Celtics team, right? It's hard to build a team like this. It's not like you're looking around and you're saying, oh, they have Steph Curry on their team. We need to make sure not to let him shoot the three. But it's everybody on their roster that is shooting the three, and it's making this Mavericks team that had this huge successful trade deadline with role player moves. They didn't make a big splash move at the deadline. They didn't go out and sign it and trade for a big star. They went and got PJ Washington. They went and got Daniel Gafford to help with their interior defense. They went and built around Luka. And this is the same team. This is the exact same Mavericks team that missed the play-in last season. The only thing they added were some role pieces. They added Derek Lively. They added Gafford, and they added PJ Washington at the deadline. That really helped propel them forward. And this was a team that was in danger of missing the playoffs this season at the deadline before they made those moves. So this is a team that still has growth to do. This is not the end of the line for the Dallas Mavericks. Luka's still young, Kyrie's still got time, and the rest of that team isn't super expensive. But this is two teams that have done a very good job with team building, which is why they got here. It's not like, and I know the Celtics are star-studded, but it's not just being star-studded. The Suns are star-studded, but they didn't build their team cohesively. The Mavericks, they've got Luka and Kyrie as the offensive engines, and then they've got solid role players that play good physical defense down low. And when you stretch them out, like Boston kind of is a nightmare matchup for this Mavericks team that likes to play a little bit bigger. When you're going up against a team like this, you have to play a little bit of small ball, and it isolates guys like Luka Doncic, your weaker defenders, and they're getting cooked. And that's really been the Celtics' game plan. It's a very smart game plan. They were able to go after him, get him in foul trouble even in the first place, which, you know, that's a whole nother conversation. Again, he didn't have the smartest game. He didn't have a great game, and he's dealing with a little bit of injury. So I think frustration kind of took over there for him a little bit. But he can't be every single game be put in this situation. And I know they're playing help defense for him. They're trying to help him out there, but he needs to get a little bit better defensively, and that's something he can work on. Can the Mavericks come back? Again, I'm inclined to say no. Do I think that this is a series that should be a sweep? The way that these games are going, I don't know if Boston loses. They're on fire right now, and the games that they had a chance to lose in, the Mavericks either couldn't shoot the ball in game 2, they couldn't match them with the bad shooting in game 2, and they made huge Luka made huge blunder getting fouled out in game 3. Two very winnable games for them. So I'm not going to say that the Mavericks have no chance, because This should have been a competitive series, especially with Porzingis out, and we don't know how bad that leg injury is. It's still listed as day to day. We don't know how bad that is for Porzingis. If he plays in game 4, I think it's going to be a sweep. I don't want I don't want to say that the Mavericks don't win a game, but they just keep making silly mistakes and they need to play almost perfect basketball. And I don't need to play perfect basketball. I mean, you fall behind 20 points and you're able to come back and make it a competitive game. That shows you that these teams can be evenly matched. You know, they have this could be a 7-game series. This could be a deep series, but the Mavericks are just making too many mistakes. They're turning the ball over. They're not playing great in the clutch, which kind of was their calling card. That's kind of how they got here. They made some big clutch plays, and they were able to neutralize some of the better players defensively. They haven't been able to play inside their game. They've been playing the Celtics game this whole time. And the Celtics like to play fast with pace, right? And the Mavericks, Luka Doncic, PJ Washington, it happened a whole bunch of times where they would try and draw a foul, which is a part of the NBA. It's not a part of the NBA that I love, but it's a part of the NBA. You'll try and draw a foul. But the Celtics aren't going to sit there and go slow. They're going to push the pace and they're going to have an odd man rush on the other end. You know, and this is part of their transition offense. This is part of their style. They play fast and it tires guys out like Luka. It tires these guys out and it's really tough to play against. It really is. But the Mavericks need to figure out a way. And again, if they play like they did last night, I think they can win game 4, especially without Porzingis. But they need to play consistently like they did last night. They need to play like they did in the first quarter. They need to play like they did in the fourth quarter. They can't play like they did in that third quarter. That third quarter effort is not enough, and Luka needs to stay on the court. There's ways that the Mavericks can win. I just don't really see it. I think they'll probably take this game at home, especially if Porzingis doesn't play, because we were able to see that the Mavs offense was having a lot of success on the inside and getting spacing without Porzingis on the court in game 3 there. If he does play, which I don't know the extent of his leg injury, it's probably over. Just because of his force on the inside, his presence, his length, it's something that they were never able to figure out in game 1 and 2. But anyway, love to hear your guys' thoughts on if the Mavericks have any chance at all. Uh, I don't know. I don't think they have a chance of winning the series, but I think they might be able to push it to 6 if they get hot here. But anyway, we're going to finish up our NBA coverage here in the next segment, talking a little bit about head coaching in the NBA. The Cavaliers and the Lakers both do not have head coaches yet. The Lakers have had their whole drama. We're going to do another update with the Lakers and talk about everything going on in the world of NBA coaches. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just went over the Mavericks side of things in the NBA Finals as they go down 0-3 to the Boston Celtics in what seems like a series that should have been closer, really, but the Celtics have just been running away with it. Not to say that they have no chance, but they're just about out of chances here. We'll see what happens tomorrow in Game 4 back in Dallas, now that Luka is back in the lineup. But we're going to finish up our NBA coverage today, talking a little bit about the coaching situation in the NBA, specifically with the Lakers, talk a little bit about the Cavs situation as well. But before we get into all of that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else watching around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw that in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to talk a little bit more about the Lakers head coaching search, do some updates. Last time we talked, the Lakers had been rejected by Dan Hurley. He rejected a 6-year, $70 million deal. Why he did that, there's a lot of reasons. He said in an article today that it wasn't to get leverage, which is kind of something that people had been running with. I agree. I don't think. I mean, sure the leverage helps, but I think it's just a better situation in UConn than it is with the Lakers, which is kind of crazy. But you have to look at this Lakers team as a team that, its main draw, LeBron James, Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis will be there, but you don't know what the situation is with LeBron James. He hasn't decided whether or not he will come back. He hasn't opted in or out to his player contract. He's got 16 days to do that. The draft is coming up. And I feel like that's kind of a deadline. I feel like you want to have a coach before the NBA draft happens, get to know those players, get to know the scheme, know what your whole roster is going to look like. I feel like it's a very important part of being a head coach GM combo, knowing what player is going to work best in that head coach's system. But it's going to be very interesting. JJ Redick is back at that number 1 slot, and this weekend, reportedly, he is going to have an interview with the Lakers. So we'll see how that goes. He obviously is here covering the NBA Finals. He's been doing a lot of media stuff. And, the main talking point with JJ Redick head coaching candidacy is the fact that this is a LeBron hire, right? And I don't think LeBron is a part of this hiring. I think this is a appease LeBron hire, not a LeBron is saying we need to hire him, because I think the Lakers are concerned that he's going to opt out of his contract. And I think that's definitely something they're taking into account. Obviously, you want to keep your star happy, and in basketball, more than really any other sport, these stars have a say in what the head coaches are, who the head coaches are, what the head coaches are doing. It's a similar situation out there in Cleveland, where they're, going to pick a head coach that Donovan Mitchell likes because they need to build around him. There's been some tension in Cleveland this last offseason with some of their guys. They came out and said, we're basically running it back. We're not going to trade anybody. But, Donovan Mitchell needs to be happy with that coach because he was talking about getting a trade. And now it seems like they're zeroing in on Pelicans assistant, James Borrego. So that again, nothing is confirmed, but that just seems like where the Cavaliers are looking. Back in LA, there's a lot of different places they can go. Kenny Atkinson has been a name that's been thrown around a lot in NBA circles. He almost accepted a head coaching job pretty recently before deciding to return to the Warriors as their assistant coach. But I feel like now is about the time you can get it. You can sense the end of that Warriors dynasty. Curry, as good as he is, can't carry that team anymore. And he's a name out there that I think would be really good, although this Lakers situation is not very good. We've already kind of discussed it a little bit, but LeBron might not be there. You don't know what they're going to do with their draft pick. They're considering drafting Bronny James, which is not worth it. I know he's declaring for the draft and some team will take him, but if any team takes him in the first rounds, it's not worth it. He's a solid player. He has great defensive skills, and he has the ability to become a solid role player in the NBA, I think. But taking him in the first round, I don't know if it's worth it. I mean, he's a guy that was coming off of the bench at USC, averaged like 6 points a game at USC, and now the Lakers are thinking about using a first round pick on him to keep LeBron there. And I know keeping LeBron is the big draw, but a draft is a great way to get young talent, and you don't have too many assets as the Lakers. If you are the Lakers, do you really want to waste that on a guy that will keep LeBron on your team for one, maybe two more seasons? We don't know how much longer he's got. We don't know how much longer he's going to be in the league for. He won't be much longer. He's already 40, you know? He's talked about wanting to play with his son, and that being the end of his career. So we don't know where this goes from there, but JJ Redick is back as being the number one option in LA. And do I think JJ Redick is going to be a good head coach? It's hard to tell, right? I think he has the ability to be a good head coach, but the situation that he's being put in with the Lakers, it's going to be tough for any coach to be considered good, right? If he has success, people are going to say, "Oh, he had LeBron James, he had Anthony Davis," right? If he doesn't have success, he's going to be the fall guy, and that's not a good situation for a coach to be in. The Lakers haven't made it out of what would be that play-in tier in 12 years. They've only been higher than the 7 seed once in the last 12 years. And this is a team that, while they went through their own struggles, they've had LeBron James for a while. They won a championship, but it's tough. It really is a tough place. You're going to get a lot of criticism, and especially as a first-time head coach, he is going to be really scrutinized with everything he does. He has a great basketball mind. Obviously, we know that. We've seen him be great with the media, really break down basketball. He has a whole X's and O's podcast with LeBron James, which is a big reason for his candidacy. I think that kind of is clouding the judgment a little bit. I think he would make a great head coach regardless of his relationship to LeBron James, but relationships help you get further faster in this world. So it's one of those things that it's a similar situation to Bronny, right? You don't want to you want to take a look at them on their own, and you don't want to take LeBron's sphere of influence into account, but it's kind of impossible to ignore. I think JJ Redick can be a good head coach. I don't know if the Lakers is a good situation for any head coach, let alone a first time head coach. And I do think it's going to be very tough for him to win over the crowd, the fans, especially since he very publicly is the second choice. Dan Hurley. They offer 6 years, 70 million. Are they going to give JJ Redick that big of a contract? Are they going to say, "Hey, you are a second choice, so we're going to pay you like our second choice"? If I'm JJ Redick, I'm not taking money that is less than what they offered Dan Hurley, because the Lakers are kind of desperate right now, and I don't want to be put in that situation. If this is my one and only tryout in the NBA, the Lakers aren't the team I want to go to. I'd almost rather go to the Cavaliers. But that's another thing. We don't know where he's going. uh, Eric, host of the wrestling podcast here, with GSMC, says the fact that Bronny James is not a first round draft pick seems odd. So much expectation because of his father's legacy would be some big shoes to fill. Will he be a top player in the NBA once drafted? Like I was saying, I don't think he's going to be. I think it's more. I think he could be a solid bench player, but I don't really see star potential in him. He's a great defender. I think he'd be a good 3-and-D guy. But it's it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting to see what Bronny James turns into as a player. Kelsey says, "How about my Celtics? They dominated. I mean, it was a weird game. They were down and then they were up, and they were down again, and they almost blew it. But they got very lucky with Luka being out. And I talked a little bit about that in our first two segments there, what the Celtics have to do. They're primed to sweep right now. And I think a lot of that hinges on the health of Kristaps Porzingis. If he plays game 4, I think they'll sweep. If not, I think they take it in 5. But this is a good Mavericks team, and I don't want to count them out of any game. I don't think they're bad enough to be swept in the finals. So we'll see what happens. But we'll we'll see. But that's all I've got for basketball today. We are going to talk a little bit more about the NFL as minicamp continues. There's more players not showing up to minicamp. Fines and punishments being handed out by the NFL in regards to free agency. We'll talk about the Falcons and Eagles tampering results that the NFL has come back with today. We will take a look at all of that and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking all about the Lakers and the Cavaliers head coaching, really the whole situation with the Lakers as the offseason continues and the draft is right around the corner. In this segment coming up, we are going to move into the NFL. We're going to talk a little bit about the punishments being handed down by the NFL to the Falcons and the Eagles situation with Saquon Barkley in regards to tampering. But before we get into all of that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMC Podcast Network. Go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all, go ahead and throw that in the chat, in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit of NFL coverage here, talking about the Falcons and the Eagles situation. Both of them were being investigated for tampering with free agencies, with the free agent period. The Eagles being investigated for their signing of Saquon Barkley. That happened very quickly after the offseason. They were cleared of everything, so no punishment coming to the Eagles. They found that everything was above board, or at least not punishable, or not bad enough to be punishable. The Falcons, on the other hand, they were punished. The Falcons were docked a fifth-round draft pick in 2025 and fined $250,000 for the tampering policy. This is having to do with Kirk Cousins, wide receiver Darrell Mooney, and tight end Charlie Warner. The NFL also fined the GM Terry Fontenot $50,000. This is all stemming from these players that they signed in the offseason. It was Kirk Cousins was the big one. They said that they did this beforehand, and this is a very interesting situation because tampering it's an interesting part of free agency. You obviously have times that you can go and talk to you can go and talk to free agents, and times that you're not allowed to do that. It's a very delicate situation when you're doing it, and it has these rules, so you have contracts, get these teams, get these teams. So it's a very tough situation. And with the Falcons, they had a big offseason. Obviously, going out and getting a quarterback, getting Kirk Cousins, Darnell Mooney. This isn't the first time in recent history though that there has been tampering policies. This is actually not nearly as bad as the most recent one. It's kind of on par with the other one. The most recent one that happened just last year, if you remember, with the Miami Dolphins, when they were fired for tampering, not with players, but with head coach possibly, in Tom Brady and Sean Payton. They were docked a first round and a third round pick in the draft for this for these actions. And tampering obviously is something that's super serious. To have a you need to have a fair free agency period. You can't be having these teams have deals set up before free agency starts. If you would like, uh, you need to have you need to have these deals. You need to have it so that all these teams can bid. Honestly, you can't have it so that if a team wants to go and have a discussion with a guy, that it's impossible. They've already gotten the deal done. And it really messes with a lot of things, not just in the NFL. And the NFL has done a very good job of dealing with tampering. This is a thing in every single league. Obviously, as the internet and more ways of communication open up, it gets harder and harder to track these things. But, it's a lot like, because all this news comes in at once, and it seems like there should be more of this than there is, but teams do a very good job of doing it, especially in free agency this year. Before free agency opened, they have that 2 day like pre-free agency window that you're allowed to go and get people signed in. That's where almost every big free agent move happened. You had just about just about every move happened before the official opening of free agency, and it makes it a little suspicious. There were two teams that were under investigation. Um, with the Eagles, they didn't find sufficient evidence to support the support that they broke the tampering policy. You know, it was uh right after he signed. James Franklin suggested that Howie Roseman spoke to Saquon Barkley during the legal tampering period. So again, tampering is kind of confusing in the NFL. There's legal tampering period, and there's times where you can't talk to these guys. It's a whole smorgasbord of ideas here, but the the main point being here that the Falcons were docked a fifth round pick for their conversations with Kirk Cousins before free agency began. Obviously leading down to him being their new quarterback, signing that massive deal. So we'll see how this affects the rest of the NFL. I mean, a fifth round pick isn't going to kill you. It wasn't a huge tampering violation. It wasn't anything that led to losing, a first round pick. But maybe we're going to start to see teams crack down a little bit more on this, because this is 2 years in a row where we had tampering violations. And, beforehand, there hadn't been one since 2016, 2011, 2008. So they were very rare, but 2 years in a row is kind of a little bit of a disturbing trend inside of the NFL. And we'll see if these continued punishments of tampering will slow it all down. But anyway, uh, we're going to finish off our show today talking a little bit about the Saints and Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara is missing camp, looking for more money as a running back. So we'll talk a little bit about everything to do with that situation. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the tampering penalties that were handed out by the NFL to the Atlanta Falcons and not to the Philadelphia Eagles. Earlier on in the show, we talked about everything NBA, including the Celtics going up 3-0 in the conference finals, what's going on with Luka and the Dallas Mavericks, and if they have a shot of coming back in this series, and updates in the head coaching search for the Los Angeles Lakers. We're going to finish off our show today, though, by talking a little bit about Alvin Kamara and him missing, just kind of walking out of practice at minicamp. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to finish off our show today sticking around in the NFL, talking a little bit about the Saints and Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara, star running back for the New Orleans Saints, leaves minicamp, just walks out in the middle of practice. He's there in the beginning. His agent says he wants more money. He has 2 years left on a 5-year, $77 million deal that he signed at the end of 2020. Currently, as it stands, he is the second highest paid running back in the league. And this feels like a response to Christian McCaffrey getting paid that $19 million average annual value deal that he was just extended to earlier this offseason. Kamara sees this as, or at least from what I'm seeing, Kamara sees this as an opportunity to, get back to the top. He was second before. Now that running backs are starting to get paid, we saw Saquon get paid. We talked about him earlier. We saw, Derrick Henry get a nice contract. Josh Jacobs get a nice contract this offseason. These running backs are starting to get paid after a really down year for running backs getting paid. There was a whole, if you remember back to last offseason, there was that whole situation with all the running backs holding out and not getting contracts. But maybe it's just Christian McCaffrey, but it seemingly has kind of blown over a little bit. But Alvin Kamara, who is, like I said, the second highest paid running back in the league right now, is asking for more money. And maybe he's just looking for a restructure, trying to get a little more guaranteed money on his contract. But he walks out in the middle. Saints coach Dennis Allen says he has no idea where he disappeared to. He was there for warm-ups. They went back to the locker room and he was gone. They haven't had a chance to discuss. I don't know if Alvin Kamara deserves another contract. This isn't like a Christian McCaffrey situation where, yes, Alvin Kamara is a double threat. He can run and he can catch, and he's very elusive. But you look back at last season, after he comes back from his suspension, he didn't run the ball particularly great. All of his yards and all of his really value was through the air. He would catch like 10 passes a game. He was one of those great check down options, and he's a great check down option to have. But he has the highest cap hit in the entire Saints organization this season. His cap hit right now is at $18.5 million. Again, the highest on the team. He's one of the last contracts that the Saints haven't touched. They restructured Taysom Hill's deal, and it's an interesting situation with Alvin Kamara because Alvin Kamara has not had that break. He broke out, he got paid, but he hasn't had that incredible season. I mean, he 3.9 yards per carry. He had less than 700 yards and only 5 touchdowns. This is his 694 yards puts him at 33rd in the league. 5 touchdowns, barely top 25 in the league. And his average was awful. 3.9 was all the way up in 150 range. he just was not very effective last season running the rock. So I don't quite understand why he's trying to get more money now. If I'm the Saints, I feel like I'm overpaying him. And I know that's kind of a rough situation to be in for a guy who, is still relatively young in this league. He came into the league in 2017. Uh in he is his 8th season in the league. He's only 28 right now. He's still got that quote unquote. He's still got like 1 or 2 years until that quote unquote running back fall off date, right? When you turn 30, running backs aren't supposed to be getting anything done anymore. But Alvin Kamara hasn't been that guy, and I know he was dealing with a lot of stuff. He's been dealing with injuries recently. In his last couple seasons, he played 13 games last year, 13 games in 2021, but this was by far his worst season. Yards per carry wise, only 2021 were worse, and ever since 2020 when he got that big contract, he hasn't been putting up those numbers. He hasn't had more than 5 touchdowns in a season since he had 16 in 2020. He's been, very good receiving the ball. I mean, he had 75 receptions. That's near the top of all running backs last season. But uh, he's been a little bit he's been really disappointing, at least in the last couple seasons. Kelsey asks if I already talked about the Falcons. Yeah, we just finished talking about that in segment 4. They got docked a 5th-round pick and got fined $250,000. Not too big of a punishment. It doesn't seem like what they did tampering wise was like so bad, but it is important for the NFL to crack down on that kind of thing. Uh, Alvin Kamara again leaving minicamp. It's not a move that I quite understand. I do understand players holding out. I understand a guy like CeeDee Lamb after coming off the season that he is, and especially where the wide receiver market is after Justin Jefferson just signed that contract and Amon-Ra signed a big contract earlier. That market's been reset about 2 or 3 times just this off season alone. It's kind of it's not a move I quite understand because Alvin Kamara he can get fined, and I know that he'll be just fine. He isn't a guy that needs all this money, but he is someone that you know I think would benefit from being at camp. He's been struggling recently. It's a brand new team really around him. I know Derek Carr's there, but new offensive linemen, getting to know them, learning how to run within your blockers. It's 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 just not something that I would do if I was Alvin Kamara. And I don't think the Saints are going to give him a new contract. And I know that his agent is trying to get that for him, and that's just him being a good agent trying to get him more money, but Alvin Kamara isn't going to get paid again. He hasn't shown that he deserves to get paid again, and he's got 2 years left on his deal. So the Saints have no reason to rush this. If Alvin Kamara comes out and he's able to rebound, have a great season, which I think he absolutely has the ability to do, he just wasn't effective on the ground last year. And I know the Saints had a really awful offensive line last season. They've done a little bit to help shore that up a little bit. So maybe he can be better this season, but we will see what happens in the future with Alvin Kamara. He's missing OTAs for now. We'll see if he's back tomorrow. I don't think he's going to get paid. But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and anything else in the world of sports. Tomorrow we will be back talking some NHL, talking more NFL news, talking anything else that happens around the world of sports. We'll have our MLB power rankings on Friday. So I'll see you tomorrow for all of that. Thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. You all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool. I'ma pull up, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. I'm tired of shit, and the copy ain't hit yet, damn it.